Hello and welcome to another episode of the Digiteacher Digest. This week I'll be chatting to Dr. Sonja Vandeleur, who's HOD of Thinking Skills, and Maryke who teaches History and Ethical Thinking at Radin School in South Africa, and we'll be discussing the Thinking Skills curriculum at the school. It seems to me that at the beginning of this century, about 2 decades ago now, there was a great concern about teaching thinking. So the basic idea was things were changing so fast that anything you taught, any content you taught, would be way out of date by the time your students had graduated. And so the whole idea is that you couldn't really teach them content. They could Google it anyway. You should be teaching them how to think. And while I have no particular gripe with this argument in general, I think there are several problems with it. And one of the first is that you can divorce content and thinking in any case. One never just thinks, one thinks about something. And you also can't divorce it from context. One doesn't just think, one thinks like a sportsman, or one thinks like a musician, or an artist, or an engineer, or an historian. Thinking is always within a context and it's about something. And so you can't divorce content and you can't divorce the traditional curriculum from any concern with teaching thinking. So what about teaching thinking skills explicitly? Well, I'm joined by Sonja and Maryke to discuss this very matter. So, hi Maryke and hi Sonja. I'm glad that you could join us on the podcast. And by way of introduction, I'd just like to start, perhaps Sonja, with you. You're HOD of Thinking Skills at Radin, but you're taking on a new role next year and an exciting conference next year. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, I'm going to, after many years at Radin, I'm moving on to become the CEO of TSSA, and Maryke will be the new head of department for cognitive education. I'm sure she's going to do a remarkable job.
Yes, congratulations.
Yes, and I'm delighted. I'm very pleased that she's the one who's taking over from me. But I'm going to take on the role of CEO of Thinking Schools South Africa, and we've got a lot planned and a lot that involves the two of you. So the first thing we're doing with TSSA is the online workshops. And Dorian, you're doing one on blended learning. There's another workshop on inquiry-based learning and a third workshop on visible thinking routines. So I think those will be very, very useful to teachers. And they're going to be breakout rooms so teachers can discuss things, which I think is something all teachers are looking forward to. And then that's at the end of May. No, that's in February, sorry. Then in March, we have the TSSA conference, and we've got 3 international speakers. There's Bena Kalick and Alison Zamuda. So Bena Kalick is the founder of the Habits of Mind, along with Art Costa. And she and her colleague Alison Zamuda will be talking on learners as researchers, which I think will be very, very valuable. Then we have Leslie Adwin. She's a South African. She's a film director, but she's become an educational activist. And she has an organization called Think Equal in the UK. And that specifically targets very young children, grade 000 to grade 3, about mindsets. And so she's got a program that works with that age group specifically. So I think that will be really interesting for us to listen to. And then this third speaker is Judy Lederman, Professor Judy Lederman, and she's a science educator. So she's very concerned about making informed decisions, because I think with the whole COVID scenario and the anti-vaxxers and the vaxxers, she feels that a lot of scientific literacy needs to come in from a very young age once more. And then to top that, we have the International Conference on Thinking, at which you two will be featured speakers. And that is happening in the end of May, 30th of May to the 2nd of June. And the website should be out by the end of September. And quite a few keynote speakers that we've organized so far. It's still building. We have David Perkins from Harvard University. We have Leslie Adwin again. She's going to be a keynote speaker. And we're going to have about 25 featured speakers. It's going to be a hybrid conference, so hopefully 100 face-to-face. We get very excited about face-to-face stuff now. So hopefully 100 face-to-face and hybrid, so it'll be live streamed. And some of the presenters from Australia, from the UK, from America, etc., they will be placed throughout the day. So we're going to be very busy next year.
It certainly sounds it. And Maryke, you've been extremely busy as well. I mean, I'm not sure whether your journalism is your side hustle or your teaching is your side hustle, but you have a book out as well. Do you want to tell us about that?
I'm not sure journalism is completely accurate. Opinion ranting might be better, but yes, it's been really great having a part-time post at Rodin, creating space to write opinion pieces. The book has just been published, but it was actually finished 3 years ago. So it might look like I've been doing a lot of things simultaneously, but actually the book was finished 3 years ago. The timelines were really tight on that. We had a year in which to research and write it. And the book is called A Brief History of South Africa, from the earliest times to the Mandela presidency. And it grew out of a desire. It came at a time when a lot of populist rhetoric was being thrown around and sort of revisiting the history of South Africa, particularly the transition, and reassessing where South Africa was at that point, 2017, 2018. Which is important and is really useful. However, the authors also felt that there were a lot of oversimplified slogans and concepts that were being thrown around, and particularly looking at the transition period, sort of 1990 to 1994, the younger generation has revisited it, and whereas the older generation does tend to venerate Nelson Mandela, the younger generation is very aware of the gaps and the downfalls and the reality that they're living now. And we think it is so important to look at that time and to assess it and go and hold people accountable, but also to do that with the right knowledge, with knowledge and with specific facts, so that these opinions can be justified. And also looking at the broader history of South Africa, understanding that so many of the challenges that we're facing, and that the government is facing, but that any government taking over would face, are rooted deeply in historical, have historical roots. So our education system, we know, is vastly unequal and it's in crisis. But if we look at, the history of the 20th century and how the apartheid government actively undermined education for the majority of people, we can see that this is not something that would easily be fixed in a few years. And just to create some appreciation for the complexity of those concerns. Also, one of my most illuminating chapters that I researched was the economy of South Africa, and understanding that we've actually been quite precarious for a long time. And often the only thing that saved us in the 20th century, there were 3 areas, was that a new gold seam got discovered. So just as we got into trouble, a new gold seam got discovered, and it sort of helped us out. And then as we got into trouble in the 1980s, there was no gold to save us. And actually we were junk status before 1994. And also just because I think there's an easy equation that does sometimes come up saying, back in the old days, it used to run like that. And just to say, actually, we need to look at that, look at those memories or those social memories that are there, and really look at them critically. So yes, that was 2017, 2018. And then the book is also particularly aimed at history teachers, because It's really difficult finding information on South African history that is factually correct and factually detailed. We'll get a lot of information on the internet saying very broad things like apartheid discriminated against people, but what does that discrimination actually look like? And as a history teacher, when we speak to students, even university students, there's a broad belief that apartheid was largely what would be termed petty apartheid. So, black people couldn't marry white people, or black, Indian, colored, white lived in separate areas. But it's part of it, but it just goes so much deeper. The discrimination with the past laws and the homelands and the Bantustans and Bantu education and the Calabar. So it's just trying to create an appreciation for our past that in our own experiences as history teachers and working with students at university level, we were seeing that there was a lack of it, and with history teachers as well. A lot of history teachers only have access to the textbook that the students are reading, and so the extent of their knowledge is limited to what's in the textbook, which is also very summarized. So a large reason for me getting involved in this project was to make very relevant information related to the curriculum available to South African teachers.
Fantastic. On to thinking. The Thinking Skills program at Radin. Now, we've tried at Radin very much to introduce it as very explicitly to teach students how to think. But thinking is always about something. So there's always a content and there's always a context. You don't just think. You think like an engineer, or you think like a musician, or you think like an historian. So what would you, the Thinking Skills program at Radin has been very largely, I think, held up as a bit of a model to follow. Does it really speak to this, though? Or are we just teaching, cognitive tools, like the thinking hats or the thinking maps and so on?
Are you asking me, or are you asking
either of them? Whoever wants to jump in.
Okay, I think it goes far deeper than that, Dorian. So they do have explicit lessons from grade 0 all the way through to grade 10. And we do teach them the habits of mind and the thinking maps. But many of our teachers have been on the visible thinking routine course through Harvard University. And I think we also encourage teachers to implement thinking skills within their lessons, and for girls to be able to identify when to use them. So it's an ongoing lifelong journey. It's not just something you do in your COG-Ed lesson or when you get a test and you can do a thinking map. So it's trying to get them to see that those tools are so worthwhile, and for them to be able to just know what to use when, so that it really helps them. And I think we do look at going a lot deeper with, especially with habits of mind. So we don't just look at, what is creativity. It's about how you can be creative in science, and we've had quite a lot of discussion around that. So I think we do go a lot deeper. I don't know if you'd like to add to that, Maryke? Also,
especially with my very talkative lows, they often refer to Sonja's lessons, and I've drawn a complete blank. What's the latest one that I said to you, Sonja, where we were talking about the need for accuracy and we were looking at study skills, and Sonja's lesson with this particular class was referenced, and I think that is part of the value, is that teachers at Radin do teach thinking skills. But what the cognitive education program and the explicit lessons do is it sort of ties it all together and allows a space for those thinking skills to become the focus, which is then embedded across the curriculum. So it's not sort of not by the way or implied. It's an explicit, let's reflect on this thinking skill, let's use this vocabulary, which we can then all share, which has been exceptionally useful.
It's often said it gives the institution a shared language, which can bind together. Students will arrive in class knowing how to use a particular cognitive tool, the thinking hats, for example, or the thinking maps. and then you don't have to explain it to them. How do you use that tool? You can just go into using it within your subject with whatever particular content you're doing. I certainly know as an English teacher that I don't use all the tools, but I'll use those that are very appropriate for particular tasks. For example, if we're studying literature and we're comparing and contrasting, well, that's a double bubble map, and it works superbly for that. But I won't touch the thinking hats or anything like that because they don't really apply to the type of thinking I'm trying to teach in my class.
And Dorian, I'd just like to add in here that the visible thinking routines, what really appeals to me is almost every single one has an aspect that develops our students' curiosity. Mm-hmm. So the see, think, wonder, we a lot of classes, I think, just don't do that really. But we've become so aware of getting our students to be curious. And for me, that's a very, very important aspect. Because we know if they're curious, that starts developing the synapses in their brain. So you're developing your intelligence. And for me, I think the visible thinking routines are wonderful in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, most school routines are almost designed to close down curiosity. Monday morning, you're doing maths, whether you like it or not. I mean, how curious can you be? It's so to have thinking routines that try to start that up again, I think are absolutely vital. Maryke? Yeah,
just to add to that, it's like you say, there are some routines which are not necessarily inspiring, but the thinking routines also just create that habit. So I also teach ethical thinking, and the thinking routine we have there is react, reflect, research, reassess. And every time we do a new ethical question, that is the routine. You write down your gut reaction or your initial reaction, you reflect on that reaction, your biases, there's research involved, and there is then a reassessment to create a more informed, I suppose, opinion. And it's a routine. We don't vary that routine itself, but it's constant practice, and we're seeing the benefits. And I'm hearing the benefits when they discuss it with each other, saying, oh, have you researched that? Or let's just check, we're going on hearsay. So those routines are exceptionally useful.
And Dorian, can I ask you a question? Well, I'd like you to. You have been the developer of the collaborative problem-solving challenge at the IEB. So you were the examiner for 2 years ago, and this year you were the moderator. And this year we just saw such an incredible. Our students were on their own for the day, and they actually didn't need teachers there, and they just worked so incredibly well. And I don't know if you would like to. I mean, you're the expert on this, and I just think it's such an incredible task for them all to get involved in.
I mean, I'm wondering what other countries have similar tasks, but it certainly has been a very interesting journey to make developing those tasks at the IB. So, I mean, basically what it is you have a problem and a set of problems, and you have to approach them from different angles using systems thinking or creative thinking or critical thinking, problem-solving approaches. And students can form groups with students from other schools, and then they take on the problem. So this year the problem was fake news. So what do you do about fake news? And they had to approach it through those different lenses. And they formed groups with students from different schools, and they collaborate and talk to each other online and then come up with solutions, which they then submit. And I've certainly noticed the level of independence is very, very high. You know, they know what to do. They've done this kind of thing so often in their classes that they're able to problem solve, which I don't think, you know, if you'd taken me at their age, I don't think I would have, we simply weren't prepared for this sort of thing. You know, we would have needed the teacher to tell us what to do. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
And I think another important aspect is they worked in such diverse groups. So some of them would work with the grade 7 and they all in grade 9. We did it with all our grade 9s. And they would have a grade 7 and a grade 11. And they'd be a bit intimidated by the grade 11 student. But they learned to work with them and with both sides, much younger and much older. And I think that's so valuable because we've lost a little bit of that being able to work in groups through the last 2 years of COVID. So I think those skills were very well, they did it very well, and I was quite impressed with them.
And certainly, I think the standard went up this year, and I wonder if it was because of they're more used to talking to each other online,
maybe
than previously, or that they were just so hungry for social contact. You find it even in school, and being able to talk with boys and things. Maybe I don't know. Now, both of you are heavily involved in ethical thinking, and ethical thinking, I think, has been emphasized in recent years, and it was certainly lacking in the past. And so we're trying to emphasize that within the challenge itself, the IAB paper. One of the sections is ethical thinking, and you're both involved in Radine with ethical thinking. What do you think of the program and how it's being implemented, and will it revolutionize education? Said he challengingly.
Shall I start with what I do?
Yes.
So I have a program. I've been working with Professor Maryke at University of Virginia. She has a course called Ethical Leadership, Giving Voice to Values. So the grade 9s have been working through that, and it's really about when you're confronted with something that challenges your values, how you can approach it, no matter who you are. You don't have to be the, rah, get up and wave your fist. But what if you're the quiet person? So it's coming from your own strengths and looking at ways. So it's about pre-scripting, peer coaching, asking mentors, rehearsing what you think might happen so that you're prepared for that. And if you are prepared, you're far better able to deal with a difficult situation than if you just go in and, you want a good outcome at the end of the day. I think everybody wants a good outcome. So to get the grade 9s to agree to that to start with, that you don't want to go into this cancel culture, etc., that you do want a positive outcome that's going to go forward. So we've been working on that, and I hope that it certainly benefited me. I work much better in difficult situations, having done the course. So it's on Coursera. Anyone can do the course for free. And I think it's a very, very worthwhile course. And so I don't think we do enough of that at schools in education. We don't look at how you deal with difficult situations. And I know Maryke is very, very interested in the well-being and that side linking in with thinking skills.
Yes. So shall I go? So this is the second year that ethical thinking is at Radine. We're just doing it with the grade 9s, and the feedback that we've been getting is very positive. And yes, it's looking at ethical dilemmas or complex ethical scenarios. They don't have to be dilemmas, and often asking students to make a decision, because policies are about decisions. Is it lives or livelihoods? Do we enforce a vaccine mandate or not? What should our justice system look like? So it's also saying you can't opt out. There has to be a decision here. So part of the ethical thinking is considering the ethics, and a big part of it is considering different perspectives and understanding that looking at something from a different perspective doesn't mean endorsing it. So empathy doesn't mean endorsement, but also using those perspectives to formulate a response to a complex ethical scenario. And a lot of the work in the early parts of the first module, they do 2 modules, is personal reflection on personal biases. So going, what are my biases? What are the blind spots? What are things that I feel very passionate about? What are possible trigger areas? Because that also obviously informs our initial reaction to ethical scenarios. And it's been very interesting as the year has been progressing, hearing the word, this is probably or the phrase, this is a result of my own bias, and then the point that they're making, which was very refreshing. It wasn't that obvious in the beginning of the year. So I think there has been growth there. And a lot of the feedback also says that the most useful part of the lessons are hearing the different perspectives. And that is often what tempers sort of views on ethical scenarios. There was something else I wanted to add just related to the critical thinking, but the critical thinking around the research when researching ethical scenarios is to actively identify your own bias and then research against it. So research the point of view that sits the most uncomfortably with you. And what we've seen is, or what I've seen is often in the beginning, students will be very in one of the extremes around an ethical scenario, and towards the end, after a lot of discussion and research, there's more of a complex middle ground that is assumed. So yeah, I think it has been successful and the students do explicitly appreciate it. Yeah.
As a history teacher, have you noticed any, do you teach the same year group?
I don't. I teach the grade 8s for history and then the grade 9s for ethical thinking.
I was going to ask if you've noticed any transfer of that skill set, because it, do they understand historical bias a little bit better having?
So often history does come up in ethics. So we looked at personhood, and a lot of they spoke very knowledgeably about obviously the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide. So I don't teach them history, but I do talk about historical topics with them, and there is a better appreciation for complexity than that I have not always experienced at other schools. So I think I'd like to believe it makes a difference, and I really do believe it makes a difference just in the quality of the conversations that we're having, which are very challenging and very critical.
So less groupthink. I mean, I think we, as teachers of critical thinking, what we fear is the sort of the whole class focuses in and it becomes a groupthink.
I think, yes, I think a space is created for individuals to voice possibly unpopular opinions and to discuss it. And there does seem to be a sense of safety in the class to consider these points of view. Yeah.
And thinking about transfer of skills, Sonja, have you been able to notice any benefits, general educational benefits from transfer of critical thinking skills? Or is this one of those things where it's worthy in its own right and doesn't necessarily lead to higher assessment marks and things like that?
I think it is worthy in its own right, Dorian, and it's very, very difficult. Maryke and I have been speaking about how do you measure this? And you can't measure it because there's so many other things that our students do, like the Model United Nations debating, etc. So all of that together adds to, how they are, not just the thinking skills. So that the measurement of it is very, very difficult. And I think the only thing we can do is to get a qualitative response from them. So we do the myself as learner scale, and Maryke and I have been speaking about maybe taking it a year earlier. So the comparisons are through 4 different grade levels from our junior school through to senior school. And it's just how they view themselves as a learner. And then there's a comparison with many schools that do the same test in the UK. So, and we're always quite a bit higher. So at least the way they view themselves as a learner is relatively high at Roedean. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I'm not sure, but because those kind of assessments, I think, always raise more questions than they answer. Very often as you become more of an expert learner, the greater the sense of your imposter syndrome. I mean, the greatest imposter syndrome is always at the PhD level, you know. So I would expect there to be some sort of decline even as your views become more nuanced and become more critical and aware of your own bias and so forth, that you might feel less confident as a learner.
Well, you always find a dip in how they view themselves as a learner when they go into senior school. You know, when they finish junior school, they think they're pretty good and they know it all at a certain age. But at least there's a comparison, so you can see that happens with all students at that age. So it's very useful to have that comparative model. So it's interesting that you say at PhD level that happens. I mean, the more you study, the more you realize you know nothing about anything, really. So that's why I think the thinking skills are so important. And we have had feedback from girls who are at tertiary institutions to say that they might not have seen, it's the usual. They haven't seen the value of it at school because it's part of their everyday. But when they leave school and they look at how other students are at university, etc., they realize how beneficial it has been that they've been through the cognitive education program.
I think to wrap up, I mean, that's a huge question. How replicable is it? You know, are we developing a model here at Redeem which can be taken to all schools in South Africa?
Yes, Maryke.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's there are two levels to accreditation, as it were, and I think that first level of just empowering teachers with visible thinking routines and how to teach teaching dispositions, I think that's already a good first step. And I know TSSA does a lot on that. But I think teachers and schools have to buy into it in order to and want to do it. But I think there's a lot of support that Redeem can offer and does offer, and I think it's a fantastic model that is being built here. Yeah, it can definitely be replicated if schools are determined to and committed to it. Yeah.
Funnily enough, we are the only school in South Africa that has the senior school accredited as a thinking school. It seems to happen mostly in primary schools, I suppose, because there's space available to implement the program. So we are the only school in South Africa to go all the way through into our senior school years.
Yeah, I mean, if all departments are silos unto themselves. So being able to break down those silos with a cognitive education program that stretches across the whole school, I think is quite an achievement. Well, thank you both for joining me for this little chat. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I hope that you can join me again sometime to unpack some further issues. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorian. Always good chatting to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. There's a link to the conference that Sonja mentioned, the ICOT conference, in the description below, and also a link to Maryke's book if you'd like to read it. I'll see you next week on the Digiteacher Digest.